Ronnie Landfield, hi. Ronnie, you are from the Bronx. You were born in the Bronx. Neither of your parents were collectors, they weren't artists, and yet at the age of 14, and I'm going to repeat that, 14, you were on 57th Street conversing with some of the most important gallery owners of the 20th century. How does that come about?
Well, actually, I should add to that, it wasn't only gallery owners. I was talking to artists as well. I mean, 1963, I'm 16 years old, I'm talking to Hans Hofmann. That was good. I was going to high school.
And you knew Eva Hess at what age?
Well, I knew Eva when I was 15, yes.
That's fantastic, yeah.
I was going to high school on 57th Street. And within a year after I started at art and design, I realized I didn't want to be a commercial artist. I wanted to be a painter. And I think it was a Life magazine article, and it had Pollock in it, and I figured I could do that. First I wanted to be Monet, but I couldn't do that quite. I really need more practice to do that. And I started making these abstract expressionist paintings, and I realized that A, I loved de Kooning, and I loved Klein, and I loved Pollock, and I could do it. And yeah, I was 14, 15 years old. My parents thought I was crazy. And I'm going to school on 57th Street, and I soon realized this is ground zero for the art world. I met Tom Wesselman, who was teaching in my high school. I met a whole bunch of the other teachers, and we would talk about the Coots Gallery, and we'd talk about the Green Gallery,
right.
We'd talk about, I would go to Knoedler and see Hans Hofmann's that was at that moment on 57th Street, and I would go to the Poindexter Gallery to see Diebenkorn or to see Al Held. And yeah, I talked to Dick Bellamy, who was running Green. We'd go there, a friend of mine and I would go there and we'd demand that he pull out some Tom Wesselman paintings. And these little kids come in, you know, like, come on, we want to see this, plug it in.
And one day you wander into Bodley Gallery.
Well, Bodley Gallery was a place we used to hang out. That's where we used to meet. And the guy who ran Bodley, at that time they were showing this kind of surrealist painting, but he knew everybody. So I'm like 14, 15 years old, and he said, hey kid, I want to show you some artist's work who, we gave him the first one-man show he ever had. And he showed me these line drawings. And he said, now remember this guy's name, kid, you're going to remember him. His name is Andy Warhol. Oh. And in those days, we didn't know who he was.
That's right. But not many years later, you're barely 20, and one of your paintings is hanging in the Whitney Annual. You describe that painting, Howl of Terror, as your break, your rejection of minimalism and hard-edge paintings. What motivated you to depart from those movements?
Well, ultimately, you know, for a couple of years, I was in California, and I was exploring the void, and I was exploring all this mystical and kind of heavy internal mystique about the universe. And I had come to the conclusion that we were floating in a void, and consequently, I needed to express that. I needed to say that. I needed to find a way to tell everybody about this truth. And so ultimately, when I came back to New York and left California, I realized I had to do this series of paintings. And I did these 15 paintings. The first, they were all 9 feet high, 6 feet wide. And I started them when I was 18 years old. And the goal was, they all had 4-inch borders, and they all had the void in the center, so that you would look at the paintings and actually disappear into the void. You couldn't avoid that.
One of your first, certainly one of your first most important collectors still at a very young age for you, is Philip Johnson, the fabled architect and art collector. How is it that you meet Philip Johnson?
Well, that's kind of coincidental. It was
Right.
kind of, as I was painting these void paintings, as I was really intensely, I mean, my parents thought I was crazy. I had to do it. And I was living downtown, sometimes with a girlfriend, sometimes at the studio. And one night, I go to the movies, and I had started the series. I had gotten 3 or 4 of them finished. And I went to the movies, and I'm sitting watching this Warhol film with Bridget Polk is in it, and the Velvet Underground's playing, and Edie Sedgwick is
Playing
in it.
on the stage.
Yeah,
right?
on the stage, live. And
At the
this
movie.
guy sitting next to me is like this painter named Salvatore Dali. And he's with some woman. I assumed it was his wife. After that, I go down, I went, me
Right.
and a friend, we took the train, went down to Union Square. I walked down to my studio, which is on Broadway and Broome Street, and the building had burned down. And I lost everything. And I didn't know what to do. So I was really angry. I called my father. He helped me clean up. And, thinking about it, my friend Dan Christensen offered to house anything we could salvage. And I moved in with my girlfriend, and I started drawing like a maniac. She had an apartment on East 4th Street, Avenue D. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I wrote a letter to Philip Johnson. Didn't know the guy. Looked him up in the phone book. He was listed, so I called. And they said, who are you? And I said, well, this artist, I just had a studio. They said, well, write him a letter. So I did. I wrote him a letter. I get a call from his secretary. She gives me an appointment to meet him. So I put on the only suit that I had, and I go uptown to the Seagram's building, top floor of the Seagram's building. I'd never seen a view like that. It was all glass. And they sit me down in a boardroom, and these Giacometti sculptures walking down the table. Philip Johnson comes in, and he says, okay, young man, what do you want from me? I thought, I don't know. So I showed him my drawings, and he said, why don't you have a job? So I said, I don't know, I'm an artist. He said, well, you got to have a job. I'm not going to support you. And he said, but when you make some art, you come back, you show them to me. And so I left feeling like, holy mackerel, this is great. So I walked into an advertising agency. I'd learned all about that in high school, and I talked my way into a job. 2 hours after I saw Philip, I went home with a job and with this potentiality of showing this guy some paintings. My friend Dan Christensen called me up. He asked me if I could share his studio because the guy he was sharing it with went back to the Midwest. So now I had this huge studio on Great Jones Street, and I finished my series. I finished these paintings. And I showed them to Philip Johnson. Make a long story short, he bought one. And that painting is in the Sheldon
In Nebraska.
Museum in Nebraska, permanent collection. And at a certain point, I wound up with a book of my drawings under my arm at the Findlay Gallery on 77th Street. I don't know why I had my drawings. No reason in particular. And Ivan Karp, the director, says to me, hey kid, what do you got? And I said, huh? He said, what do you got on your arm? I said, it's my drawings. He said, well, let me see them. So I showed the book to Ivan, and I was kind of embarrassed, and there were all these minimal drawings of the series and maybe some sculptures I was thinking of making. And they looked like Donald Judd's, and he said, hey, Donald, you want to see something? Judd comes over and looks at my drawings. I turned red, and Ivan says to me, here, kid, here's his phone number. You go out, you call. They're looking for young artists. I said, okay. So I went outside. This was 77th Street, Madison Avenue. Put a dime in the meter, made this call. This woman answers the phone. I told her I just got her number from Ivan Karp. She said, well, why don't you come over? I'm at the Keaney Gallery on 57th Street. So I said, okay. Now I'm 19 years old, sharing a studio with Dan Christensen on Great Jones. I just done these big void paintings, finished the series. I go down to see this woman at Keaney. She was a nice lady. I thought she was great. She was, her name was Dorothy Keaney.
Right.
And she said, "Can I come to your studio and see your paintings?" I was like, "What? Of course, yes." And Dorothy came down, and she asked me to curate a show at the Keaney. I'm 19 years old. At the Keaney Gallery, could I curate a show and include all my friends? So I said, "Sure, no problem." So we in March of 1967, I would now turned 20. I curated the show at the Keaney Gallery. I included Dan, my friend Ken Scholl, my friend Peter Young, another guy named Peter Gorfain, and myself. I did this 9 by 12-foot painting. And I was already past the void paintings. I was trying to get somewhere else. I was trying to make paint. I was trying to be painterly. I was trying to do surface. I wanted to get free. I wanted to find my own voice. And everybody who was in that show, we all got letters from the Whitney Museum inviting us to be in the Whitney Annual.
Right.
So I was now confronted with this fact that I was going to show a painting at the Whitney. The only problem was I didn't have any place to live.
So, Ronnie, let me, you were talking about your thinking about the paintings at that time. Let's jump ahead to along the way in this show, which is just to my left here. Talk to us about that painting and about your thinking now.
Well, again, I've always organized or attempted to organize my thoughts as to reflect truth and reality, at least the way I see it. And paintings I do today, which are clearly related to nature, they're organized in a sense, I guess I should really say since the late 60s, my paintings have had a kind of foreground, middle ground, and background. Painting like Along the Way, you can almost see there's a ground, there's a middle ground, and a background. It's a combination of what I call my organic stain paintings, which are most of these paintings, the new ones, recent paintings, are organic, and my empirical stain paintings, painting like that, where the shapes are actually drawn with brushes.
While
So
we're on your paintings, let's talk about lyrical abstraction. You are a founder of Lyrical Abstraction. There are many others at the Art Students League, Larry Poons, Matt Lipsky, Dan Christensen, who are associated with that movement. Tell us about the importance in your mind of lyrical abstraction for 20th century.
Well, it's a moment. Dan was actually never there.
Right.
Unfortunately, I wanted him to teach at the League, but physically he was incapable.
Right.
And certainly he got sick, died too young. The notion, you had asked me about Howl of Terror a while back. What I came to realize was that what matters is our feelings. What matters is the expression of feeling. Anything else is a lie. Anything that gets too empirical, that is too caught up in a way or a process, gets beyond. I learned this from Larry, actually. It's like making music. It's like, when you make music, you're in the moment. And I wanted my paintings to get away from this notion of they have to be this way and this way and this way. And I wanted to find a way to be in the moment. Abstract expressionism, yes. But there had been a kind of cleansing in the middle 60s, early 60s, of this kind of subjectivity. As artists, we were supposed to be objective. We were supposed to be perfect. We were supposed to know exactly why and what. So the idea for me, the Howl of Terror, was breaking with all the old rules to find a new path, a new way. Now, talking to Ken Nolan one day, with two of us were talking about color, and it's quite clear that color is a psychological language. We get it from Van Gogh. He talks about that. How can we express who we are? How can we express every day? How can we do it? What do we got? We got tools. We got color. We got paint. We got supplies. Right. We got material. So the idea of getting away from this Juddian kind of law that says art has to be objective and it has to be, it's nonsense. Art doesn't have to be anything. And well, what a lot of us began to realize was we could go back to expression. We could go back to the basics of expression. For me, The Howl of Terror was the beginning of that. Right. And for lyrical abstraction, by the late 60s, by let's say 68, I was beginning to explore what you weren't supposed to do. And one of the things you weren't supposed to do was combine different styles of painting in one. So I did a painting like Heaven and Earth, which not only that, but landscape painting had become a no-no.
Right.
They used to say about de Kooning that the weakness about him is he did these abstract landscapes. I couldn't think of a better thing I wanted to do than to make some strong abstract landscape paintings. And so I made a painting like Heaven and Earth, and then just to deal with what Judd was talking about how things had to be objective and they had to be perfect in terms of telling the truth, and his premise was that painting was dead because it was illusionary. So I decided to paint the most illusionary painting I could possibly paint.
And you're arguing about all of this with these other artists and the movements they represent at Max's Kansas City. How is it you come to be at the opening of Max's Kansas City, about which I'm very jealous? I mean, if there were one place I would have liked to have been, then it would be Max's.
Dan called me up and said, "Hey, man, you want to go to a party?" Oh, yeah, let's go. Where?
Right.
And it was on, this new place. It was on Park Avenue South between 17th and 18th Street. This dark, black place, go in, it's all dark. And it was paradise. It was like, none of us wanted to leave. There was a Judd on the wall, there was a Flav in the back room, and every artist I'd ever wanted to meet was milling around, and,
right.
We were all there.
And fighting about art.
Well, sometimes.
Yeah.
Throwing chickpeas at each other.
And one day you're sitting with some art critics at a table at Max's, and one of the critics says something to you which you say was salient to you, important to you for the rest of your
In a sense. I mean, it was important for me to be able to express to other people. But yeah, she asked me, so what are your paintings about? So I said, I don't know, paintings are about my feelings. And she said, who gives a shit about your feelings? I care about my feelings. Which taught me a lesson, that that's exactly correct. People who look at art, look at it through their own eyes. So if a work of art's going to be successful, you have to, A, look at it through your eyes, but also you have to be able to understand that people are looking at the work, and they want also to read it, to feel it, to understand it. That they need to understand just like I need to understand in order to do it. Right. And that was actually I never forgot what she said. Yes.
Borrowing from, in one of your essays, you borrow from Marshall McLuhan the dichotomy between hot and cold in describing 20th century art. Could you explain that to us?
Well, clearly, when I wrote about, I think the name of the things I was talking about was cool and collected or too hot to handle. And what was happening in the art world was what was being given all the attention, what was dominating was the cool. The cool meaning the conceptual, the art that was fathered by Marcel Duchamp, and in my view, Marcel Duchamp and Picasso. Why Picasso? Because of found objects. Because if I say it's art, it's art. And the Duchampian conceptualism had, along with minimal art, along with pop art, had come to absolutely dominate the art world. On the other hand, there's the hot side. The hot side, characterized by passion, characterized by color, fathered by Matisse and Picasso. Picasso fathering both sides. That side, characterized by abstract expressionism, had become passion, had become unpopular. All of a sudden, it was old hat. All of a sudden, if you made painting, you couldn't get to first base in the art world. And to me, this was nonsense, not cool. So I started doing lectures using, McLuhan's concepts, but the lectures of, at one point, the hot and the cold stood side by side. Why is it in our world today, the cool side dominates? I would say now, it's far more even. Far more even. Maybe the hot side is beginning to come back big time. That's all because of me.
That's all because of you. And you teach. You teach at the Art Students League. What is your connection to the Art Students League and to teaching?
Well, a long time ago, I went to the league as a kid, and I drew, and I got a lot from it. And indeed, the teacher I had changed my life. He said to me I had to find my own voice, Stephen Green. But also I have a friend named Peter Reginato who used to say there was this thing called School of Trace, that everything in the cool side of the art world was trace. This was before I started to teach at the League in '94. And he was right. And the great thing about the Art Students League is it's art made by hand. People don't trace. People actually create with their hands. They make sculpture, they make prints, they make paintings, they draw. And I remember getting into a huge fight at the League. I was doing these lectures, and somebody came and attacked the Art Students League for just that they weren't technological enough. Now, wait a minute. What do you mean technological? We work. We're artists. We do things by hand. This is what we do. This is what we love. This is what makes us special. This is what makes this place unique. And so when I started to teach there, it's because I believe in the place. It's something to believe in.
And you're still teaching there, and Larry Poons is there with you, and you and Poons meet when?
I met Poons that, I think it was at, I knew him anyway before that because he was famous. And I wasn't. But I walked into the Longview Country Club one day at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Now, the Longview Country Club was not a country club. It was Max's.
No, it was the Longview Country Club was this bar across the street.
From Max's, right.
And Mickey Ruskin, the owner of Max's, was trying to get all of us artists out of his place so that we could hang out somewhere else so that he could get all the musicians in so he could get a new crowd. So he opens this bar on 19th Street in Park Avenue. And it was bright lights. Peter had a piece of sculpture there. And I walked in there one day. Larry's sitting at the bar. There's nobody else. I sat down next to him. And he looked at me, he smiled. He said, "Hi, I'm Larry Poons." And I knew who he was. I said, "Oh, hi, I'm the guy who's got the painting opposite yours at the Whitney Annual."
It's fantastic.
And we became friends.
We need to open up the meeting here to some questions from the audience, some questions that come in online from Rudy, and to introduce, first of all, Peter Reginato, your old friend.
Yeah, it's my buddy. We met in Berkeley back in 1964.
That's fantastic. And also an instructor at the League.
Right. So ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please just indicate. And we will be taking questions from people on Facebook as well. Is there anyone in the room?
Here's a question, a couple questions over here, right?
Who was the critic who said it was my feelings, not yours? That count?
She will remain anonymous.
Right. Next question.
You know her?
You talked about the difference between the hot side and the cold side, and I feel like I've been hearing for many years that the hot side is sort of having a resurgence. I wonder what makes you think that.
Well, I think I think you're absolutely correct. Because you see paintings in galleries. There's a great show there, and there's another one there. And back when I was doing those lectures in the early 90s, you didn't see shows of paintings. It wasn't happening, and it's happening now. There are big retrospectives in Michelangelo aside, David Hockney aside. There are important works of visual art that are passionate, that are all over the place to be seen. Back in the early 90s, through the 80s, through the late 70s, that was not the case. And it has come back, yes, indeed. And I hope it continues, yes.
We have another question here at the back.
In terms of the lineage of sort of great colorists, which I'd include yourself and Hans Hofmann, what did Hofmann say to you when you met him that afternoon in the gallery?
He said to me to keep painting. And I mean, I was stunned because it was a spectacular show. And what I'd heard, what somebody told me, was that his wife had just died. And I wanted to talk to him, and I told him I was living downtown in a loft. I had a loft, and I was painting. I was doing these paintings. And he told me to keep painting, essentially. But I was knocked out that I actually got to talk to Hans Hofmann in 1963.
Were his paintings very influential on your work at that time?
Absolutely.
Yeah, who were the influences on
Well,
your...
in terms of that moment, I was trying to get away from de Kooning, to get away from Franz Klein, to get away from Pollock, and seeing the Hoffmans with the geometry,
Right.
the hard-edged bands. Right after I met him, I went downtown to my studio on Bleecker and the Bowery, and I poured some, I was painting with oil paint.
Right.
I poured some oil paint out on, I was working on paper, and kind of let it kind of flow, and then I made some boxes, which come right out of Hoffman. And it made sense to me to use both.
Right.
And so when I went to California, and I began using acrylic paint, it was a lot easier, I started using these hard-edged lines against these splatters. First works I did, actually, while I hitchhiked across the country, were crayon on paper. And I was doing these stripes with these blasts as a way to, and in a way it's incorporating Hoffman.
And what about staining and Frankenthaler in that aspect of your work?
Yeah, when I started to stain, it was I really, the only person I really understood as being a stain painter. I mean, I was 21 years old, was Morris Louis. And I knew the veil paintings, and I understood those. But Helen was doing something different that I didn't really know all of her work at that point. I thought of her as an abstract expressionist who was a little too close to the Greenbergians. And I was trying to do what I had said earlier. Larry kind of influenced me like, hey, Ronnie, stop making masterpieces. This is what he told me. Cheat River was a masterpiece. Heaven and Earth was a masterpiece. And St. Augustine, a masterpiece. Start doing something every day. And the way for me to do that was I just laid out 30 feet of canvas on the floor. I mixed up a bunch of paint, and I started throwing it on the floor. And to the chagrin of my downstairs neighbor, the paint went right through the floor, all over the stuff.
And you still, this is still your method?
That's how I work.
Right.
Yeah, and it's because it's daily. It's doing it
Right.
like playing music.
Right.
Great.
And-
Well, we're going to take a question from our Facebook audience.
Okay, the first question is actually from the Findlay Galleries Instagram audience, which is also watching us live on their Instagram feed. And the question is from F. Pretel, and it's, what is your favorite art period and why?
Aside from now, I relate to the color field people, and I relate to the Impressionists, and I relate to, as you said, lyrical abstraction. And to some degree, I mean, the Impressionists changed the world. When I tell my students, when we talk painting, I often have told them to work light to dark. And that's what I learned from Monet, that he worked light to dark. And I've thought of alternatives to the term lyrical abstraction, because that relates also to European painting, as being, maybe I'm a post-color field painter, post-impressionist, I like the Impressionists, the Post-Impressionists. I'm not crazy about Cubism. I'm crazy about Picasso. I'm crazy about Matisse. But I guess my favorite period is probably 20th century abstract expressionism, color field painting, and what we do today.
So when you say you work light to dark, let's take this painting, for example. Where do you start on this
Well,
painting?
the ground is light. And what I've learned in the way I work is it's very easy to make color darker, especially when it's this thin. But it's not possible to make it lighter. So you have to understand each step of the way. And you work light, and you work it light, darker, 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 darker until it speaks. That's the way I work.
Another question, this time from the Facebook account of the Art Students League. Question is, how do you find working in your country studio compared to your longtime Tribeca studio? Does the setting have a different influence on your work, and how?
Well, it's very different in the way my paint reacts because it actually evaporates my paint, and I'm too lazy to cover it, so I'm still learning. But essentially, I have more space, I have more time. I loved and I missed Tribeca. I lived there for 43 years, and it was a great studio, and I loved it, but it was so crowded. And now I have a lot of space, and it's a relief, and I like fresh air, and I like the beauty of nature, and I miss the city, but I also am enjoying being out of the city. So it's still new.
Nice. We have another question right here.
I know the art world was a lot smaller than. Can you talk about what it was like walking along 57th Street and visiting galleries?
That's an interesting question.
Oh, it was another universe. I mean, it was like 57th Street in those days was ground zero. There was a gallery kind of where the 9 is now, but it might have even been right next door to where the 9 is. And I remember going into that gallery and seeing a group show. And I was like, never heard of the place. It was really funky. It was up a flight of stairs. And that was the first Jasper Johns painting I ever saw. I mean, it was extraordinary what was happening. I mean, again, Knoedler was across the street. Marlborough hadn't opened yet. Sidney Janis Gallery was on the same floor as the Betty Parsons Gallery. I think in the same building as Tibor Denage. It was amazing. You could just go everywhere you wanted to go on 57th Street or 56th Street. The Coots Gallery was where Mary Boone is now at 745 Fifth Avenue. Poindexter was on 56th Street. So this was the place. I mean, as a kid, I was like 16 years old. I wandered down to the Museum of Modern Art, and I saw this gigantic Arshil Gorky show. And I'd have to say, I mean, Gorky was one of my favorite artists, except for the fact that I used to talk to my brother, and my brother always used to say to me, "Don't be Gorky."
Who said to you, you don't want to be a 19th generation abstract expressionist? That was Dan Christensen, right?
No, that was Stephen Green.
Oh, Stephen Green, yeah.
No, he was right. Yeah. Got to find your own voice. That's important.
Well, you certainly did that, my friend.
Thank you. That's the hope.
That's the hope.
Okay, a couple of more questions from our online audience on Facebook, and these are sort of technical questions about painting. One, does the size of painting matter?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's, to some degree, it's very, very important to be able to express yourself, to not limit what you need to say. And size, scale, color, all of those, surface, all of those factors add up to what you're saying, what you're expressing, what it is that you need to do as an artist. So it's not important, that's not to say that big is better, but big is different. And what we're trying to do as artists is to actually say something, I mean, you don't have to bring it back, like, let's say to somebody like Bob Dylan. just crossed my mind. You know, when he did Blonde on Blonde, he actually took the chance and has one song, Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands, which takes up an entire album. That the back of one of his 33s is one song. Okay, yeah, if you got something to say and it's big, you say it. Doesn't have to be. There's some short ones too. You can make little paintings, make big paintings. Yes.
And this is the final question of this evening, again from our online audience. And they want to know, Ronnie, what do you do to your paints to reach that watercolor appearance? Because if it's acrylic, how are you able to get this look from your paint?
That's a very good question. Early on, I met this guy named Sam Golden. And Sam told me that during World War II, he worked in the laundry, and Morris Lewis went to Sam's uncle, Lenny Beaucourt, and said, I want something that can penetrate the canvas. You got anything? What can you do? And Lenny asked his nephew Sam, who was working with him producing his paint, and Sam said, yeah, I remember when I was working in the Army, and I was cleaning these knapsacks and these tents and these canvas holders, we used to use this heavy soap. And if I can use that soap and we can mix it with water-soluble paint, it'll go into the fabric and it'll bring the color in. Right. And that's what they used. And so Sam and Lenny, when they began to market this acrylic paint called Aquatech, they invented this thing that Sam called water tension breaker. And when one day, I think it was about 1968, I asked Ken Noland, hey man, what do you use to get the paint into this canvas? Right. And he said, I use Sam's water tension breaker. So I went over to the factory and I asked Sam, hey man, can I have some water tension breaker? And they gave me gallons of it, and it changed my work. Yeah, it's good. They don't sell it anymore. It comes under a new name. But the Golden Paint Company, which was begun by Sam Golden, I think they call it Wetting Agent now. I highly recommend.
Fred, thank you. Findlay Galleries, thank you. Especially Ronnie, thank you.
It was fun. Thank
Yes.
you all for coming.
Thank all of you.